graph that we're going to look at is what's called a frequency polygon. So we'll begin with the definition for a frequency polygon. And we want to remember that frequency polygon is a very mathematical term for a graph. Probably not a term that you have heard about in the past. So the best thing that we can do with this is remember that a frequency polygon, which we may not know what that is a type of line graph, because we all are familiar with line graphs. So this particular graph is going to have on the x-axis, which remember is your horizontal axis going across, it's going to have the midpoints of each class. Okay, so this means that your classes, which are groups of numbers, you're going to have pulled out the middle number in each class, and that number is going to be marked off across the bottom of the graph. And then on the y-axis, which is the vertical axis going up and down, you're going to put your frequencies. That is how many times each midpoint occurs. All right, and remember it's a line graph, so in terms of graphing, you're going to have a series of points. Those points are going to be connected to form a line graph. And then usually on a frequency polygon, you will see that the first point is connected back down to the x-axis, and also the last point. Okay, so we want to remember frequency polygon, same as a line graph, midpoints on the x-axis, frequency on the y. And so what we're going to focus on in this presentation is we want to be able to look at a frequency polygon, for example, the one that we see here on the screen, and we want to be able to answer questions about that graph. All right, so before we get started, we want to be sure that we understand exactly what we're looking at. So I'm going to take one of these points, and this is the point that is going to correspond to a midpoint of 23 and a frequency of 8. Okay, so what that point represents is that there are 8 people who bought this product that were 23 years old. Okay, so there were 8 23-year-olds who purchased the product. All right, so let's go ahead and let's look at the questions that they're going to be asking us for a frequency polygon. All right, so our first question says, how many customers who purchased the product were 37 years old? All right, how many people who purchased the product were 37 years old? So I'm going to go back to my graph, and I'm going to find the 37, and I'm going to locate the point above that 37. So here's the point right here. And so how many people who were 37, how many 37-year-olds purchased that product? So to come up with my answer, I just need to find the corresponding value going across. And so I can see that there are 6 people who were 37 who purchased the product. All right, so I'm going to put a 6 here for this one. All right, so the next question says the product was most popular with which age customer? All right, so how old was the customer that felt that the product was most popular with? And so what are we looking for most popular? It would make sense that we would be looking for the highest point on the graph. All right, so I'm going to be talking about this point right here, and the question says, how old were the people for whom the product was most popular? So if I drop down from that point, I can see that the product was most popular with the 30-year-olds. Okay, the next question says the product was least popular with which age customer? All right, so least popular would correspond to the lowest point on the graph. All right, now, this is my lowest point on the graph that actually corresponds to an age. Okay, now remember that this last point over here, this is just where we brought the graph down to the x-axis, but there's no age underneath. So least popular, we're going to reference back to this point, to our lowest point on the graph that corresponds to an age, and we'll see that that's 58. All right, so my next question is a little bit tougher. It says, how many customers between the ages of 25 and 55 purchased the product? Okay, so between 25 and 55 for my ages. And so what makes this a little bit tougher to deal with is that those are not actually numbers that we see along the bottom of the graph, 25 to 55. So we have to estimate a little bit. So 25 is going to fall somewhere between 23 and 30. So I'm going to place a mark right there. That's about my 25. And my 55 is going to be somewhere between 51 and 58. All right, and so what I'm going to do here is I am going to extend these lines straight up on the graph. All right, so remember that we want to go between 25, which is my first dotted line, and 55, which is the second dotted line. So if you look in between 25 and 55, you'll see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4 points. So let's figure out what those points are. So we've got 12. This one is at 6. This one is about halfway between 4 and 6, so I'm going to say 5. And this one is probably at 1. So how many people are represented between my dotted lines? So I would have 24 if I add up 12 plus 6 plus 5 plus 1. So there are 24 people between the ages of 25 and 55 who purchased that product. All right, so I'm going to put a 24 right here. All right, and then finally, the last question says, how many customers were a part of the survey? So how many customers do we have all in all? All right, so we need to look at the frequencies for all of the points. All right, so we already have a few of these done from the last part of the problem. So we need to go ahead and do the rest. So this is an 8. This is a 3. This is 0, so it's not going to really impact things much. We have a 2. Okay, and remember again, the first dot and the last dot don't count because they don't correspond to ages. All right, so what I'm going to need to do now is I'm going to need to take these numbers and add them up. All right, and that will tell me how many total people I have in the survey. All right, so I'm going to grab my calculator. 3 plus 8 plus 12. All right, that kind of looks like a 1 sitting right there, but it is not. All right, 3 plus 8 plus 12 plus 6 plus 5 plus 1 plus 2. All right, so it looks like we have 37 people represented in this survey. All right, so I'm going to go put the 37 in for that. All right, so hopefully that gives you an idea of how a frequency polygon works and how to answer questions based on that graph.